views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Welcome to the Bronx Filmmakers Collective Presents. My name is Linda Manning. I'm a screenwriter and playwright living here in the Bronx. We're excited today to change up our usual format and bring you a Screenwriters Roundtable co-sponsored by Cinefim. Cinefim is a nonprofit that provides fiscal sponsorship, project support, mentorship, and other programs empowering female-identified and non-binary filmmakers. And now let's meet our participants. I'd like to welcome Ingrid Youngerman, a writer-director whose debut feature, Women Who Kill, won the jury prize for Best Screenplay at the Tribeca Film Festival, and writer-director Danielle Earle, whose critically acclaimed web series, Brooklyn is in Love, won Best Writing at the LA Web Series Festival, and Christina Rea, an extremely prolific writer and director, is the creator of the comedic web series Kelsey, named by IndieWire as one of the best comedy web series. And Hae Yun Park is a writer and performer whose highly anticipated detective comedy web series BKPI was called Delightfully Wacky by IndieWire. Thank you all so much for being here. I'd like to begin at the beginning hear from each of you about your process and how you start, or how an idea for a script comes to you. Is it characters? Is it a storyline? Is it an idea that you want to write about? Like, what's the beginning? And Danielle, if you'd like to start.
Okay. Well, I guess, especially with writing Brooklyn is in Love, I kind of catered to what's happening around me at that time. And during that time, I was kind of in my late 20s, and it was during Occupy Wall Street and everything was going on. So it's kind of like, I think when writing a storyline, you have to have something like a story that's kind of, intimate to yourself, I guess, and like the people around you. So, I guess that's how I go about it.
That's how that started. What about you, Ingrid?
For me, I think it has to start with something I'm struggling to say, and maybe I feel like someone hasn't heard me yet about this thing, and I think it's different for everybody. It can be sometimes an image or a song or a film, but for me, I have to be emotionally connected to it.
Does the story come, so it's a feeling more than than certain characters or certain plot, or?
Yeah, it's a feeling, because I feel like it's such a monster to write a feature or a show that if you're not emotionally invested in it, I would get too tired before it was over, I think.
Right. Christina, how does the process begin for you usually?
Sort of similarly, I will have something I'm trying to say or something that's frustrating me, and that kind of gets put into, my pocket. Like, so I want to do something with that feeling. But then it is sort of an initial moment or experience that turns that into an actual film idea. So it's sort of a combination. But I tend to have things I want to explore, and usually something has to inspire me to turn that into an actual film.
Toward it, I understand.
Yeah, same answer, but either something that boils my blood.
Yeah.
So like, I have to tell this story, or I love just making my friends laugh, so whatever makes them giggle or anything. I love just watching people and observing, so a lot of times like things start from just a note on my phone about something I observed that tickled me in a way. Yeah.
Cool.
I think so. Some people, I feel like it was Eliza Hittman who made Beach Rats recently. I haven't heard her Q&As, but I feel like with that film, she was sort of responding more outside in and sort of studying the people around her and being inspired by research and personalities and real people. So I think it can be however you get the work done.
Right. What writers usually have some way that they get the work done, a routine and a place maybe, or even certain things that are slightly superstitious about what has to be where, and what time of day you usually work. I'd love to hear from you about that, like how you actually get the work done every day.
To me, still like disciplining myself is a struggle. So I psych myself out and try to have like reward systems for myself. Like if I write how many hours this day, I get to eat something good for dinner.
Right.
But just because I have several day jobs and having to be all over the place, there are certain cafes that I like, or I have a favorite spot in my house that I like to just curl up and write. But whatever gets me in the mood. Yeah.
So it differs.
It differs. Yeah, I'm not so
And
precious.
you don't
about
have
it.
a hard and fast routine.
No. Yeah.
No. Do you, Christina?
Somewhat. So I have a writing group with two of my best friends who are also two of my favorite writers. And we meet every week and try to hold each other accountable. So it's like you have to write 10 pages on whatever you're writing by next week. And that's a really, because I'm not good at self-discipline at all. Like, I would let myself off the hook. And so it's very helpful to have other writers who help with that. But I tend to write at night, like very, very late at night. And so I know that if I'm trying to crank something out, I need to give myself that time in the evening into the late hours to write.
And leaving time to drink too, like red wine, whiskey.
A lot of
You're not at the end of the day. You have that creative brain.
Oh, I mean, yeah, because I get my second wind at the end of the night. Like I'm exhausted, and
Right.
then sort of 11 rolls around, and I want to write something.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's great.
I don't
That's
sleep
unusual.
much.
I get it. No, it's not. Ingrid, do you have a routine or a place?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a morning person, so, and then I go to bed at like 9 like a loser. So I think morning, usually I've found now over the years that 7 to 1 is about all I can handle. And I try to do that every day, and most of it's a failure. So, a cafe or at home or whatever. But I think understanding that like most of those days are going to be wasteful and just kind of showing up.
But that's not, I don't
Yeah.
think. That's
Yeah.
not, that is, and even if you're sitting there staring, right?
Yeah.
Nothing's
Oh, yeah.
coming.
Mostly
There's
that's
so-
all it is.
there's
You're like,
so-
oh, I wonder
right.
what show's just been released on Netflix. There must be 13. I'm going to watch one of those.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. It's tough.
It's showing up.
It is.
That's huge.
And being willing to like deal with depression and
Yeah.
I mean it's
Yeah.
hard. It's really
And
lonely.
writing badly a lot.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think Mindy Kaling said it too. Like a lot of times she would just be Googling for 8 hours, and then the last hour something conjures up. Yeah.
And understanding too, like the more you write, and the more you're going to throw away. And now I know that a first draft of a feature, I outline. So I outline until the outline feels tight and the structure's tight, and then I start the pages, and then I understand that first draft is going to be totally rewritten from page 1. But at least the structure's sound, because that's the hardest part, I think, to
Yeah.
rewrite.
With a feature, for sure.
Yeah.
Have any of you guys ever written anything without an outline?
Yes.
I think it's a
Many
mistake.
times.
For me, it's a mistake now. I don't know if you guys feel like that, but
Right.
I have, but often I've sort of had an outline in my head, even if I never put it on paper. I had been thinking about it long enough that I had an outline.
I had a friend recently who said who went back to writing that way without the outline, just more experiencing it viscerally. But it was really hard to do that. So I like outlining.
yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I just think that it's easier visually to see the problems in an outline for some reason, because once you get in the pages, it's even hard for me to read on the computer. In a PDF, it's just weird. So I don't know, for some reason an outline you see the scenes more clearly.
Well, so much of screenwriting is structure, so you're
Yeah.
just going at it.
Sometimes I have such inspiration, just like passion, I need to get it out and just start writing and then go back. And so sometimes I'm still like caught in the excitement of where's this going, that I kind of just need to write. And then maybe it's terrible, but
Honestly, I think we all just find what our groove is, right,
Yeah.
as we go.
Yeah. It might change for the project. What about you? Do you have a schedule or a place that you like to write?
It's like basically what you said, Christina, the same thing. It's like it usually happens at like 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm usually like, it's like really odd hours that or I could be listening to the radio or something, and like listening to a song, like, and it kind of just triggers me, and I just develop like a storyline, or I could be walking in a park and it kind of just like starts to come out, but yeah, I think just getting yourself out there, like in a park or some area that you kind of just like seclude yourself, and just develop a storyline. It really helps, I think.
So I'm curious about all of you when you started writing. At what point in your lives did this writer's voice emerge? Ian?
I guess writing was my favorite thing to do growing up. I guess the first time I created a fiction was when I was supposed to write an autobiographical essay in 4th grade, but I lied and said my 2nd grade teacher died of cancer. Just made up a story and they loved it. I won awards. But I specifically started writing scripts about 5 years ago because I came to New York to be an actor 10 years ago and realized that unless I write for myself, I'm not going to have the opportunity. So yeah, that's how.
I think that happens with a lot of actors, and I think it's really a great way to deal with that energy.
Yeah,
and that
it's
juice.
almost like nowadays, if you want to be an actor, you have to be able to write for yourself.
Yeah. Great content.
Yeah.
What about you? When did you start?
So my mom likes to tell a story that I wrote a comic book when I was 5. I didn't read comic books, but I wrote one. And I started writing short stories around that time too. And I loved movies and knew that I wanted to make movies as a kid. And so I wrote what I thought were screenplays as a child, but really they were just, they were short stories that I, in my mind, assumed that I would one day make into movies. And yeah, it's just always been there. I've always been a writer.
That's great.
Do you have like the elevator pitch for one of those? So there was a gerbil, and he was a king.
I mean, I have kept all of them.
You need to come up with pitches for each and every one of them.
But I mean, that voice is still you, right?
Yeah.
Like that kid voice is still finding
Yeah.
its way through, I think, right?
Yeah.
When did you begin this?
Yeah, like same thing. As a kid
Young?
writing bad poetry, and I felt like I had these terrible secrets to tell, which weren't. I was just I grew up religious, so it was like everything was a terrible secret. So I would write poems about all the things that I was ashamed of, and then that escalated, into. I wrote my first play in high school about prostitutes. I was obsessed with prostitutes.
How was that received in high school?
Really well. We put it on.
Nice.
And I don't think any of the parents knew what was going to happen there. So it was, I don't know. I've been into, like, it was at my time when I knew nothing. I mean, nothing about that world, and just like
Right.
my imagination of what that world would be. Still, though, that was a character that was like getting outside of where she was born, and so I think that was like me again, trying to work through some stuff.
Right.
Did you create more theater since then?
Yeah, I did a lot of theater for a long time. Did you as well?
Yeah, I trained first in theater acting, so yeah,
Oh,
I
cool.
love theater.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too. That's where I started writing, like playwriting, and then directing theater, and then doing stuff from there. Yeah.
That's what you have access to, I guess, when you're a kid, the easiest.
That's true.
Probably.
Yeah, I
Except
don't
kids
even know.
now, I don't know, with their phones can make a quick movie.
I don't think
Yeah.
there's
That's
so
true.
many like role playing
Right.
the way we did. Yeah.
Right. When did you start writing down?
Yeah, I would say it's similar to what Christina mentioned about the making a comic book. When I was younger, I was like about like maybe 11 or 12. I made like a Perfect Life cartoon and like Maggie Scotch, and I developed all these stories. So yeah, I would say like around that time, 12, 13 years old, and just comic books. I kind of wanted to just do that when I was wanting to think about what I wanted to do as a career, but like be an animator type thing. But later in life, it started doing like screenplays and all that other stuff.
Nice.
So yeah.
Getting back to the process we were talking about before, I'm curious if your processes for writing a feature are different than a web series. Danielle, go ahead.
So you mentioned about like, is it different from a web series?
Yeah, like how you start. When you start a feature, if you're
Is it
starting
different
web series,
Yeah.
are they different?
I think so. I think that like web series, I think is much. To me, I think it's like a little bit easier. Like especially with working with Lover's Game, it was like a struggle with doing a feature film, because it does take a longer time to put it together. But I think web series, there's a lot of advantages and getting exposure. I think through that, it's a good test run. I think if you want to kind of do that as a career, with filmmaking. So.
Did you find when you were writing it that it came a little quicker and easier than the screenplay?
Yeah, especially with Brooklyn is in Love, I would say it took us maybe a couple months to put it together, filming, the first season. For like a feature-length film, it takes like a year or more.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say, you know, it's hard to decide which one, you know, to work. I think both are great. You know?
Right. Right.
But, yeah.
Ingrid, you've done both, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What is does your process differ?
Yeah, I think web series are great because they're sort of, it's just like you're doing something. Usually it's a first or second draft, and it's just sort of more emotional, and I think it's more fast paced, and you're kind of like playing a little bit, and I like the freedom of that. Yeah. It reminds me, like I want to do more web series just to remind myself that there's a freedom about it when you just kind of go for it. And then I think a feature's completely opposite. Even a TV show, I think, you know, when you're writing a pitch for many seasons, or you know, figuring out, it's almost like writing 3 or 4 or 5 features. So there's these major worlds with characters, and I think it's just to layer it the way it should be layered. It takes so much time and energy, and then web series is completely opposite. It's more like I thought of my web series as just scenes, and that was fun and easy.
But there's a challenge to that short thing,
Yeah.
making that little
Yeah,
story
there
happen
is structure
and a
within
little
that.
structure. I mean, that
Yeah.
can be as hard in
Yeah.
some ways.
Yeah.
You've done
Both,
right?
yeah. I think that they're different but similar because you have a season of a web series, and so
Right.
like my web series did have an arc throughout the entire season that needed to be cohesive and sort of work from episode to episode, but each episode was its own thing and needed to kind of have its own story within it. And so it was kind of, it was exciting to sort of break the formula a bit and play around with that with each episode while still kind of sticking to this overall seasonal arc. And I love TV, and I've always wanted to write for TV. I'd love to be a showrunner of a TV show one day, and so that was exciting, was to kind of get to do that. Features, I think you're with it much longer, and you're kind of fleshing it out because it needs to work in the exact time that it is and exactly what it is. With a series, you can kind of come back with a new season and reinvent it, and play around with it, and so they're different.
Right.
Well, I haven't produced a feature yet, but I'm working on a script.
So how about just the writing process for you?
Yeah, I find it a lot more challenging. Like what Ingrid said, web series, I'm used to making self-contained episodes, so it's like grabbing the essence of it and just like letting it beat all the way. And then like to have all the characters and stories expand, I'm in the thick of it. Like it's very challenging. Yeah.
The
A lot
structure.
of flashcards are needed.
Oh, I wanted to ask you guys that. Do you do the cards on the board? You do.
It helps me, like a lot of color coded.
Another way to move it
Yeah.
around and organize. And
Building blocks, yeah.
Yeah. Do any of the rest of you do that?
No, not really.
No. You know what
Yeah,
I'm
I think
talking
it's also-
about. You know, 3x5 cards on there. Yeah.
I think it's a good way to procrastinate too, while
Oh,
still
yes,
while
exactly.
still working on the thing. You're like,
Stickers.
"Well,
Feeling like you're
this tape is
getting
not
something
cut
done
right."
today.
But you're still in the world.
I like just the visual of it, like just sort of seeing it kind of pulls it out of my head in a way. But I only do it with longer form stuff. If I'm writing a short, I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, you would need to. And how I'm also curious about who you go to for feedback. Like when you finished a draft and you're not there yet, but you really need somebody else to read it and give you some notes, and then how you respond to notes, how much you take in.
Yeah, I usually, because I do work with like a script editor to help, I always have to have a second opinion because I can't rely on myself, especially. But I do want to start especially what, Christina mentioned about doing like more like writing groups and stuff and start to get more feedback. So it's really good because, especially your audience, whoever you're, for your film, it could be a really diverse audience. So, different things you like to, get the chance to ask questions for other writers. And I think it's a good way to do it, but it's definitely good to have a second opinion, especially.
And in terms of notes, do you just sort of respond instinctively, to what someone's saying, do this or don't do that, or?
Yeah, that's a good question. Sometimes, I do take, feedback and everything with that. In some areas I'm like, no, I want to see, but it's now as I'm getting older, you have to really keep an open mind, and especially with other people and getting feedback and that, so, yeah.
Yeah, it's not easy, right? Ingrid, to you, give your scripts to someone when they're
Yeah.
still raw? For you?
No, when I'm ready. I
Yeah.
can't take it when it's still something that's raw for me emotionally, or if I haven't cracked it myself yet. I wait until the right
So
time.
when you feel like I've gotten as far as I can
Yeah.
on my own now.
Exactly,
And
and
do you
I've
have-
fixed the problems that I know are problems.
Right.
And that I definitely have learned that I'm a little bit too sensitive when it's too early. And then I'll wait, and then I have a small group that I would share with.
Right.
But I think that also is learning yourself and who you are. It like makes it a little bit of a better process, and you're able to hear more things. And I think working more in a TV situation with collaborators, it's taught me to pay attention to my knee-jerk no's, because it's like, we're like, that's a terrible idea, and then I realized it was a great idea in some sort of form of it. So I've been doing that sort of like improv yes and thing, and taking
Right.
ideas and being like, okay, I feel like I don't like it, but I'm going to listen to it anyway and see if I can create something good out of it. And usually you can.
Yeah, and sometimes they give you, they're right. It's hard to go, yeah, they're right.
Yeah.
Or you've fallen in love with something you've written and it's not working.
But I'm very picky about choosing who to share my scripts with, because I think unknowingly we sometimes, to fellow artists, like give feedback that stunts us and could be toxic in a
Yeah.
way. So when it's raw, I try to share with people. I try to be clear with like what I want to hear from them, and sometimes it might be like, just tell me everything you love about it, when
Right.
you're in a vulnerable
Right.
state. So when people ask my feedback too, I try to be clear on what realms do you want my feedback on. So I don't know. I think like especially grassroots artists, like we're all here for each other. So really protecting each other's process feels important. Like I've had sometimes getting feedback, unwarranted feedback, and not be able to write for a few weeks.
This creative thing in us, it's fragile. I mean, it's sort of the beast that feeds you, and it's fragile. And it's taken me getting older to respect it in a way enough to say no or yes or be specific about what you want, and not just be like, all right, I'll listen and I can take it all. Maybe you can't, and that's okay.
Yeah. So
You
like
know?
yes and is great too, and I mean it feels like it's stunting you. Like whatever feedback doesn't get my imagination flying and thinking deeper, I just say no.
Try to let it go.
Yeah.
That's smart.
Yeah.
That's smart. And do you have someone that you give your work to?
Yeah, so as I said, I have a writing group with
Right.
2 friends who I met in college in screenwriting class. And so they're usually my first 2 because I trust them and they know my process and they know what I'm asking of them. And they also they're both very talented, but they're different. They have different tastes and they would give slightly different feedback, which is great for me. I might do it with our first draft. It really depends on how I feel about that particular, screenplay. But I try to be very specific about what I want from them. And if I go wider, especially if I share it with anyone else, I'm very specific about what I'm asking of you, because sometimes people just, send you stuff you don't want to hear or don't need to hear. But my first feature, for instance, I wrote when I was 21. I was a senior in college, and I made it when I was 22, and it's very flawed. And I workshopped it in my screenwriting class, but I wasn't as open to feedback. And then, now, years later, 6 years later, I see how open I should have been to that feedback. And so now as a writer, I'm just I try to be very open, even if I don't follow, everyone's advice, or even if I completely disagree, I try to be very open to who I think my audience is and what I think they have to say about that script.
Do any of you do table reads with actors after you finish to hear it?
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time. Like just so everybody hops on my bed and
Yeah.
that's a weird way to start. Yeah. So, yeah. What I'm saying is you don't even need to
Table
have table reads.
You can have bed reads.
Even if you can't get a table, you can just
You could
invite
do
one.
it.
Yeah. So I love to share with my friends. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you?
No.
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 No. That's not part of. Before you go to producing, you don't.
No, I don't really. I've done them, and it's a lot of work. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a lot of work to put them together,
Yeah.
and I think I think just the voices in my head are like, I trust them, I guess.
That's lovely.
Unless they're too crazy.